Today, Dungeons & Dragons is widely seen as a massive engine for storytelling. It operates as a platform for deep character arcs, emotional narratives, and sprawling cinematic campaigns. But in the 1970s, it was a different experience. It was a rigid, tactical wargame, heavily focused on resource management and basic survival, right down to the precise movement of metal miniatures used to track combat. The earliest adventures relied on a strict sandbox design philosophy. Creators mapped out elaborate subterranean dungeons, but deliberately left the rooms empty of any predetermined plot or narrative arc. There was no grand cinematic objective to achieve. The story was simply the emergent, unpredictable chaos that happened while players desperately tried to survive a hostile environment. By 1982, a new design philosophy was brewing within the industry. Creators argued tabletop adventures should emulate the moral clarity and definitive conclusions of fantasy novels. The friction lay in the rule set. D&D's heavily mathematical system was built to simulate weapon damage and movement ranges, not to support tightly choreographed plots. Enter Douglas Niles, a writer with serious literary aspirations. Niles spectacularly failed a copy editing test for the game's publisher, TSR, but his raw storytelling talent prompted the company to hire him as a designer anyway. His second professional assignment was a 32-page booklet called Curse of Xanathon, or Module X3. Under his pen, it became an accidental testing ground for this new narrative-first philosophy. Handing a novelist the reins to a tactical combat engine created a bizarre clash of styles. It produced the messy, fascinating missing link between pure dungeon crawling and modern game design. Niles threw out the standard subterranean maze. He dropped players straight into the thriving town of Rhoona, a geopolitical powder keg on the brink of a dwarving military invasion, complete with religious infiltration and political espionage. To map a massive medieval town without drawing every single building, the module introduced a procedural generation system. The map was divided into 11 distinct socio-economic districts, and dungeon masters used randomized tables to spawn taverns and tradesmen on the fly. Yet beneath this illusion of open-world freedom, the adventures secretly forced players onto a strict, highly choreographed 5-act narrative track. At the same time, TSR was facing intense external pressure. A growing moral panic over fringe media was sweeping the country, leading the publisher to create a strict internal code of ethics that heavily censored occult themes to avoid public backlash. To comply with these corporate mandates, Niles masked his dark espionage plot beneath sanitized, cartoonish villainy. The Mad Duke of Rhoona wasn't summoning demons. Instead, he issued bizarre decrees, like banning fire outright, and forcing citizens to pay their taxes exclusively in beer. Curse of Xanathon was a paradox. It offered the mechanics of a living, breathing sandbox, but it used them to hide a rigidly censored, pre-programmed script. The tension between a written script and player freedom became most obvious with the module's central antagonist, the High Priest Xanathon. Niles needed to ensure this villain survived long enough to reach the final dramatic act. To solve this pacing issue, the module introduced a proto-phylactery mechanic. The priest was completely invulnerable to physical and magical damage, forcing players to retreat and embark on a specific mountain quest to find a diamond containing the villain's soul. In actual play, however, resourceful groups quickly realized a glaring loophole. Magical invulnerability does not prevent physical restraint. Utilizing the game's standard grappling rules, players would simply tackle the high priest to the ground, tie him up with thick rope, gag his mouth to stop his spellcasting, and drag him directly to the local jail. Standard grappling rules had given the players a way to kidnap the plot and lock it in a cell. It was an early realization that player agency, when backed by the mechanical rules of the game, will almost always find the shortcut through a scripted narrative. This clash between old-school rules and new-school storytelling also broke the game in the opposite direction, creating a phenomenon archivists call the empty room psych. Earlier tactical modules trained players to aggressively tap every single floorboard with a 10-foot pole to check for deadly traps. So when Niles included Room 19 in the villain's temple, a featureless room designed simply for realistic architectural pacing, the players panicked. Groups would spend hours meticulously investigating this blank space, convinced they were missing a hidden puzzle, causing the module's carefully plotted timeline to grind to a halt. Anticipating that players might wander off track, the designers included a heavy-handed failsafe. If the group missed a vital piece of information, the text explicitly instructed the dungeon master to drop a disguised beggar into the street to physically guide the players back toward the intended story beat. When the friction between wandering freely in a sandbox and hitting the required beats of a cinematic story became too great, the design required literal divine intervention just to keep the story from collapsing. Contemporary critics were quick to spot the flaws. Reviewers criticized the module as a programmed affair, noting that the required sequence of story beats stripped away the investigative freedom that defines the hobby. The mechanics were clearly overstretched by the narrative ambition. Yet, the attempt itself signaled a permanent shift in how designers approached the medium. Curse of Xanathon proved to the industry that tabletop RPGs could move beyond the simple cycle of slaying goblins in caves to explore deep urban mystery and political espionage. Today's emotionally resonant narrative epics didn't spring up fully formed. They stand directly upon the highly flawed, glorious foundations of tied-up priests, backwards horses, and complete